Hi Paranjay, thanks for being with NewsClick. First, a very basic question. As a journalist, what do you think is the value of an opinion poll? I mean, a cynical person might just say that it's another gimmick for the media to play around with, so you can avoid doing real journalism. Do you think that there's actually any value in opinion polls?
There are opinion polls, and I do believe there's considerable value in opinion polls. I mean, there have been opinion polls in this country which have been able to very accurately predict the outcome of elections at a national level. And there have also been opinion polls which have got terribly wrong. I mean, I can just give you two random examples. The fact that Mrs. Indira Gandhi would return to power in January 1980 was only anticipated by an opinion poll that was conducted by people like Dr. Prannoy Roy and David Butler and Dr. Ashok Lahiri. When you go back to what happened, say in 2004, almost all the opinion polls went completely wrong, and they didn't anticipate that the Bharatiya Janata Party-led National Democratic Alliance would get defeated. In fact, many opinion polls also didn't predict that in 2009, the United Progressive Alliance government would return to power. So opinion polls can accurately predict, and opinion polls can go terribly wrong. Now, what is the value of these opinion polls as a journalist? Let me tell you, as a journalist, if I'm writing about what's happening, say the political situation in Delhi, which is elections are supposed to take place. Now, I go and meet 15 people or 20 people, and on the basis of my understanding, that I choose my random sample, and then I write an article. So I've become an opinion pollster. Now, which is not the same thing as saying that if a particular agency, say, interviews 1,000 or 2,000 or a few thousand people through a structured questionnaire and then arrives at the same conclusion as I do, speaking to 10 or 15 people, we might be both of the same view or of a different view. The short point is that if you do believe in Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, that freedom of expression is a fundamental right, then I don't think it makes any sense to ban opinion polls as has been suggested. I think the issue is, how do you make the working of opinion polls and their publication and their public dissemination done through a far more transparent process? I think the key issue is, those who conduct opinion polls, do they disclose enough? Do they tell their readers, their viewers, their listeners all that has gone behind this opinion polling, including those who sponsored that opinion poll, including whether or not they have any affiliation to a particular ruling, to a particular political party or not? The short point is, yes, just as journalists can go wrong and we allow our own subjective perceptions or opinions to cloud our judgment, opinion polls can also be manipulated, and in fact have been manipulated. But that is in itself not a reason why you should ban them altogether.
14 of the 15 parties who actually responded to the Election Commission have asked for a ban on opinion polls, stating, as you've just mentioned, that they could be unscientific, that there's no transparent process, that they could be manipulated and could lead to skewing of votes. Again, as you've pointed out, you've had parties like the BJP which have changed their stance, I think, over the years, and are now saying that 19(1)(a) should be protected and opinion polls shouldn't be banned. Don't you think that there are actual dangers in having a media, publishing questionable opinions as such? And how would you go about streamlining or making this procedure more transparent? Is there something we could learn from Western countries, possibly?
The whole issue of the Bharatiya Janata Party today saying they're in favor of opinion polls, everybody else is saying they're not. The CPIM is a little bit here, not entirely there. But what is the BJP saying? The BJP is saying that just because the opinion polls are indicating that the Congress is doing badly or the UP is doing badly, that's why they want opinion polls banned. But the Bharatiya Janata Party itself earlier, some years ago, had also supported this whole idea that you should not have opinion polls. Point one. I think so there's an element of hypocrisy in what the BJP is saying. But I think the more important issue is, when do you stop the dissemination of opinion polls? Is it from the date of notification of the poll, which is what the Election Commission has reportedly suggested in a letter to the...
But you do agree that it can skew results, though?
No, 1 minute. No, there is, as of now, people are not at all sure. Veteran opinion pollsters from across the world, including people like David Butler and others, have argued that it could cut both ways. You could have what is called a bandwagon effect. That means if a particular opinion poll shows a particular party is winning, then more people would want to go along with that, and even if they were undecided earlier, they would vote with that party because that bandwagon effect. Now this may not matter when the verdict is decisive, but this may matter in elections which are contested or keenly contested, where a small proportion or a small number of voters who were earlier undecided get influenced by an opinion poll. That's one point. The other viewpoint says that you could have an underdog effect, that you find actually an opinion poll showing a particular party is leading, then the voter concern says, no, I want to favor the underdog and give the underdog a bigger chance to have a more keen election or a more keenly contested election. Now, there's no concrete evidence either way. If anything, if at all there is any evidence, it is probably pointing towards the bandwagon effect. Again, it doesn't matter when the verdict is decisive. It matters only in situations where a small proportion or a small number of floating voters would make a difference. Now, again, when you look at what is the international experience, I really do not know, how other countries work. What the All India Anna Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam has said in its formal communication to the Election Commission here, they said as many as 16 of the 27 European countries of the European Union have some sort of banning on the reporting of opinion polls. Once again, from when to when? Once you say, from the date of notification, date of announcement, in India, because of the size of our country, because elections are phased out over a period of time, because, in the same state you can have elections on more than one day, which is why even when that happens, all the results are finally announced on a particular day. Now, even in such situations where we have, should it be, suppose you want to stop the reporting of opinion polls, let's not use the word ban, should it be from the date of notification, or should it be 48 hours before the actual polling takes place? Now, in India, we have a situation that from the date of notification of a particular election or by the Election Commission, by the time that entire process is over, it could vary from a few weeks to a few months. Now, that is really the problem. Now, this whole issue of when do you stop reporting? And you say, okay, you don't have exit polls. Why? What is an exit poll? When people are coming out of the polling booth, they say, okay, we voted for A, B or C. You're assuming that people are A, truthful. Secondly, you are assuming that all the elections are held on time, which never happens. Then the question is, we have a curious anomaly right now that exists in our country. Television channels are prohibited from reporting election-related news 48 hours from the time the polling begins, say at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. on a particular day, till that whole election process is complete, say at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, or till the number of people who are standing in queue at a polling booth, nobody is left to vote. Okay. Now, this particular restriction, which is under Article 19(2), it's supposed to be a reasonable restriction, is applying only to the electronic media, only to television. Curiously, it does not apply to the print medium for an anomaly which has to be rectified. Either the Election Commission or somebody has to move the Supreme Court. Because you have a curious situation where on the morning of the poll, you can have a particular so-called opinion poll printed, which indicates that the wind is blowing in favor of one party or the other. Now, this has actually happened because you have corruption within the media. There was a prominent newspaper, Hindustan, which had printed on the day of polling an article which some people may have thought was a news item, but was actually a paid-for advertisement, which indicated that there was a kind of a wave in favor of the Congress party. The following day, the same newspaper said, no, this was not actually a news item, but a paid-for item. It was a sponsored item, by which time polling was over. Now, there have been such instances, but despite the fact that there are a few rotten apples in the basket, I am arguing here that don't throw that baby out with the bathwater. There are problems, there is paid news, there is corruption within the media, opinion pollsters have particular political affiliations which they do not disclose, there is corruption, but don't have a blanket ban on opinion polls. And if you're going to stop television or the electronic medium from broadcasting news relating to the election 48 hours before polling, have that same restriction for the print medium as well.
So you've actually brought out how quite a few issues are coalescing into a broader issue of how elections are covered in India. Do you actually think we need to go down the legislative route to deal with these issues in a single format? And as a corollary, where does this power end?
You know, this is a difficult question to answer. It's as difficult as trying to say how should the media regulate itself.
Yes.
In an ideal world, you can say self-regulation is the best form of regulation. But what do you do when within the media there are corrupt elements, there are rogue elements? What do you do with them? I think one way forward could be that if all opinion pollsters and if all media voluntarily agree to a certain code of conduct. And this code of conduct would, if it is not voluntarily agreed, and there's every reason why it may not be voluntarily agreed to by everybody concerned, it could nevertheless be in the form of a guideline. Maybe that could be one step forward before making it a law or a rule which has statutory backing. What are these guidelines? It's not enough to say, okay, your margin of error is 3%. You tuck it in fine print at the bottom of the page. You need a magnifying glass to look at it. It's not enough to say, these are the number of people we vote and the dates and the locations or the socio-economic background. It's also important to put out the questionnaire. In this day and age of the internet, there's no reason why all this information cannot be put on the net, even if it is not printed in a newspaper or not put out on a television channel or not broadcast on a radio channel. What could be given are the links, so those who are interested can scrutinize. It's okay, dates, the kind of sampling that has happened, the kind of questions that have been asked, the sequence in when questions asked. Suppose I ask a question, do you prefer Harshvardhan to Sheila Dikshit as the Chief Minister of Delhi? You may get one kind of a response. Or you might have another question, do you think Arvind Kejriwal is better than Sheila Dikshit or Harshvardhan as the Chief Minister? Or you can say, here are 3 chief ministerial candidates, tick on the person you want or the person who you think is best suited to be the Chief Minister of Delhi. So the way the questions are framed and structured, the order in which the questions are made, all of these should be in the public domain. And not just the margin of error, and not just the number of people interviewed, and not just the dates and areas and so on and so forth. So I think what is required is far greater transparency.
So you wouldn't actually believe in the need for a regulatory agency or a standardizing agency of some sort, much like, say, in the UK you have the British Polling Council, for example, which I think is the apex organization that deals with polls, opinion polls and so on. Do you think that that is a workable system in India, or would that restrict journalist freedom too much?
There would be a certain amount of restriction, but I think ideally, if opinion pollsters and the media could come together and put together a voluntary code of conduct which everybody adheres to, and all opinion pollsters voluntarily agree, and there is a considerable amount of consensus within the media and among those who conduct these opinion polls, then your problem would be solved. Then you would not need that statutory intervention. If, however, there is no consensus and there is no kind of a voluntary kind of set of guidelines, a kind of self-regulation, a kind of self-governance that comes through, then I suppose if that cannot be worked out, then it might be better for the government of India to get its act together. The government of India itself conducts polls on a regular basis. Major government programs and policies are formulated on the basis of opinion polls conducted by a government organization called the NSSO, the National Sample Survey Organization. So opinion polls by themselves, there's nothing wrong with them. It's how well they are conducted, how sincerely they are conducted, how free of bias, how well structured, how broad and deep the polling takes place. I think those are the real issues we need to address.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paranjay. That's all we have time for today, and thank you for watching NewsClick.